The scripture reading brings us to 1 Samuel chapter 28. Chapter 28 is a interesting chapter, to say the least. I have it broken down into two sections. The first is simply verses 1 and 2, and I have that titled, "The Philistines Gather Against Saul and the Israelites." In these two verses, you see that the Philistines are getting ready to go to war with the children of Israel, and Achish, the king of Gath, which is one of the Philistines' kings, he is telling David that, hey, David, you're going to have to go fight for me now. And David gives him a very ambiguous answer. And that's found in verse number 2. He says, "And David said to Achish, Surely thou shalt know what thy servant can do." Now, David wasn't going to fight against his own people, but see, Achish, remember, he thought that that's exactly what David has already been doing. But we know David was not going to go fight against his own people. I don't know if he had another route of escape to do something different, or if he planned to turn on the Philistines in the midst of war. I don't know, but it's just kind of a very ambiguous answer that he gives. But Achish is so impressed that he is essentially telling David that he can be his bodyguard there in verse number 2. Now, the remainder of this chapter, verse number 3 through the end of the chapter, deals with Saul. Because the Philistines are getting ready to go to war against the Israelites, Saul is now getting his army ready to fight. Saul goes and sees this great army of the Philistines as it's come before him, and he gets scared to death. And we see that in verse number 5. It says, "And when Saul saw the host of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart greatly trembled. And when Saul inquired of the Lord answered him not, neither by dreams, nor by Urim, nor by the prophets." And what this made me think about was Proverbs chapter 1 and wisdom's response when she is being ignored. It says in verse number 27, "When your fear cometh as desolation, and your destruction come as a whirlwind, when distress and anguish cometh upon you, then shall they call upon me, but I will not answer. They shall seek me early, but they shall not find me, for that they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord." Saul did not choose the fear of the Lord. Instead of doing as God had instructed him to do, he did what he saw was fit. And now it is his time of need, and he's calling upon the Lord, and that's the answer that he's getting, which is nothing. So what does he do? He has no prophets. He has no men of God to consult. Samuel is dead, and that's what our scripture tells us right there. It reminds us of this fact. So he goes to find a witch, and he goes to a place called Endor. Now, Saul was supposed to have eradicated all these wizards and witches. You see that in the scripture. But two things. Number one, there was still this witch there. Number two, his people around him knew it. So they were probably had been visiting this lady in the past. So what Saul does is he goes and disguises himself. He takes off his kingly robes, and he travels through, I want to say it's about 10 miles to get to Endor from where they were at in Gilboa. Travels by night and comes upon her. And we see in verse number 9, as Saul approaches the woman, I thought of something I thought was interesting in verse number 9. The woman said unto him, "Behold, thou knowest that Saul," because at this point she doesn't know that this is Saul. She says, "Behold, thou knowest that Saul hath done, how he hath cut off those that have familiar spirits and the wizards out of the land. Wherefore then layest thou a snare for my life to cause me to die?" And then he goes on and says, I swear that no punishment will happen unto you. I thought about those drug dealers and such that when they go to sell drugs unto, I don't know why I thought it's kind of late, but they go to sell drugs and they say, "Now you're not a cop now. If you're a cop, you have to tell me if you're a cop." So I don't know. The woman was afraid. She's like, "Why are you doing this? You know that Saul does this." And Saul assures her, There's, nothing's going to happen to you. So then she proceeds to speak unto him. She asks him, who is it you want to talk with? And we see that in verse number 11. And he said, bring me up Samuel. And I say this is a very interesting chapter because Samuel, again, it has been stated a second time that Samuel is dead. And Saul goes to this witch. Now, understand, this witch had no power. What had happened right here was absolutely a supernatural event, but it was ordained of God. This woman was not even expecting what she had saw. That's why it says in verse number 12, the woman saw Samuel, and she cried with a loud voice. And the woman spake to Saul, saying, why hast thou deceived me, for thou art Saul? She was scared to death. Why? Because normally they look in their little crystal ball or whatever they're doing, and they speak in these generalities and whittle it down until they can say some type of specifics, not because of some supernatural divine power, but because of ungodly unction and craftiness. She was not expecting to see what she was seeing. And so God supernaturally uses this event to bring news unto Saul. And so Samuel comes forth. She sees him. He doesn't. That's why he asks. He says, what are you seeing? She describes it there in verse number 13. And then Samuel begins speaking to Saul. And Saul's like, what do I do? He says, what's coming to pass is what I told you was coming to pass. The kingdom is being rent from you, and it's being given unto thy neighbor David. And he says David here unto him there in verse number 17. And he gives them in verse number 17 that there is, 16 and 17, that judgment is fallen. And verse number 18, he gives them the reason why. He says, because thou obeyest not the voice of the Lord, nor executest his fierce wrath upon Amalek, therefore hath the Lord done this thing unto thee this day. And then he gives him something that he wasn't expecting to hear, and that is his doom there in verse number, let me get that up for you if you can see it. Verse number 19, moreover, the Lord will also deliver Israel into the hand of the Philistines, and tomorrow shalt thou and thy sons be with me. The Lord also shall deliver the host of Israel into the hand of the Philistines. And so Saul, when he hears this, he falls back down to the ground. His fears were not alleviated. In fact, they were amplified because of this meeting here. And the woman came unto him. I don't know what happened during this time. I don't know if she excused herself, but she came back unto Saul. It says there in verse number 21, Saul, he was troubled and had tried to get him to eat some, and eventually they got him to eat. I had this second section titled Saul Seeks Samuel by Way of the Witch, just so you know, I had that up there. But he didn't want to eat, but he finally ate. They got him to do that. She killed a fatted calf for him, brought it to Saul, and before his servants they did eat. Then they rose up and went away that night. So that is 1 Samuel chapter 28. Like I said, an interesting chapter, pretty straightforward. It's just strange. You wonder why God would maybe present that in the manner in which he did, because he's God, and he wanted to, I guess, let Saul know that judgment was coming down. And that's the way he chose to do it. So that's going to be it for this lesson. I hope this has been a help to you. God bless, and Lord willing, we'll see you soon.